Thank you all for coming to the Local Media and Culture, what does it all mean for the music scene panel. I'm particularly excited about this one, and it has a really special place in my heart because even though I'm a converted believer when it comes to the importance of, news and information for making decisions about our lives and the role that it plays in our society, it was really the radio that got me started and got me going in all of this. And that's partially because I play rock music, that sort of weird, quirky stuff that people might call indie rock or college rock. And this is really how I sort of found my peers growing up, and it was just kind of a natural thing. We all supported each other. We would work together to, get the word out about the local all-ages venue. We'd share tips and stories about how to get, the press involved in our scenes and to cover the stuff that we were doing. And it was really interesting because we didn't realize what we were doing was basically a form of community organizing, right? And the media aspect of all of that was really interesting. I quickly learned that we had a few options open to us when it came to the media. College radio would pay attention, public access would pay attention, and the campus newspapers would pay attention. And these were the sort of outlets that perked up when local artists came around because they were more involved in the things that were happening locally. And because they diverted so much from the sort of mainstream stuff we were hearing on the radio all the time, they also became favorites for a lot of the folks. And it was around this time that I started to learn more about the record industry itself and the way that it's basically like these tentacles of a major label creep all the way down into every aspect of the music industry, sort of down the food chain. And I started to feel like everywhere I looked, there were only a few companies at the top that were controlling everything. For me, this became really clear when I learned about the '96 Telecommunications Act and Clear Channel. You see, prior to '96, I think many of you know that there were limits on how many radio stations a single company could own in your community and across the country. Congress effectively eliminated that overnight, so Clear Channel went from owning 40 radio stations to over 1,200. Now, growing your business, great thing. But when you have that kind of skyrocket go on, it forced a lot of these stations to change what their objectives were to meet a new bottom line. So you replace staff and DJs with computers because that's a lot cheaper. You pipe in the same shows from Minneapolis to Detroit to Seattle to Nashville because it's more cost effective to do it that way. And, for me, I guess that was sort of my light bulb moment, right? That was the point that I realized there was this connection between these policy things that happen in DC and the way it plays out for musicians and creators and folks in communities. I realized that I launched into that whole description without even introducing myself, so I guess I should do that too. I'm Candace, by the way, and I work at Free Press. And Free Press is putting on this conference, and thank you all for coming. Our whole thing is working on these policy issues that happen in Washington, usually just by corporations and policymakers, and there's no input from the public, and we try to bring the public input into that. So for me, the revelation about Clear Channel was kind of this light bulb thing, like, oh, okay, there's this connection here. And, you could take the internet as another example. I think it's clear that over the last 20 years or so, technology has gotten a lot cheaper. It's easier for people to do things like record, release, distribute their own music. But you can't take the role of something like net neutrality for granted in that. And that is basically the principle that keeps the people that give you access to the internet, the AT&Ts, Verizons, Comcasts, from deciding which websites go slow, which websites go fast. They have to treat everything equally. These are all policy things that impact the way that artists are able to, make a living and do what they do. And so this panel is really all about exploring those relationships, the connections between the media system that we have and how it impacts the local music scenes. And we specifically we chose the word scenes because it's not just about how it impacts the artists themselves, it's really about the whole ecosystem. So it's the venues, it's the media that covers it, it is the people that go out to shows in the first place, and how all these things interact with each other. And so we have a really awesome panel here who are going to talk about these things, and I think we're actually going to kick it off with Casey from Future of Music.
My name's Casey Rae-Hunter. I'm from Future of Music Coalition, which is a DC-based national nonprofit research, education, and advocacy for musicians, organization for musicians. Basically anything at the intersection of music, technology, policy, and law. That's where we are. And we care tremendously about media policy because it's essentially, it defines how artists participate and earn a living. And we've been doing this for 11 years. One of the things that we observed when the organization started was that, you know, there was tremendous opportunity in this transition to digital, provided that artists were able to utilize those tools. So that's one side of the thing. The other side of the thing is radio, which Candace just talked about. And I'm here personally, not just as a representative of Future of Music Coalition and, you know, a large community of engaged independent musicians and managers and independent labels and so on and so forth, but also as somebody who has participated in these local music scenes. I grew up in Burlington, Vermont, playing in bands with my buddy Josh Levy from Free Press, who's here. We were in some fairly popular bands. The band that he was in went on essentially to become Gogol Bordello. The band that I was in essentially went on to become Slayer. That's not true. That's not true. I also worked as the music editor at my local alternative news weekly, 7 Days newspaper, for a number of years. And so I've seen these local scenes from a few different sides. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about personally was that federal policy has an actual impact on local music scenes. And being an old bastard, I straddle like a couple of generational points. You know, I existed in my local music community before the '96 Telecom Act, which Candace described, and you know, I work in the federal policy space after that. And I also retain connections to all of my friends that are still, you know, rocking out in the local scenes. And if you ask me anecdotally when sort of like everything changed, I would probably say, it seems like it was the afternoon of August 2nd, 1996, you know? It was when nobody got played on local radio, local commercial radio anymore, and it was huge. And I saw what an impact that had on not just local music scenes, but regional music scenes, and in turn the ability of bands, you know, to tour and build those kind of grassroots networks that could develop into sustainable careers. I'm reaching for my bag right now because I have one other thing to show you guys, and if I wasn't so under-caffeinated, I would have figured this out before. We're also getting interested in the live music space, which is something that my organization hadn't really paid a ton of attention to. Jesus Christ, I'm just going to stand up. We hadn't really paid that much attention to it because we'd been spending more time looking at the recorded music space and the changes that technology were kind of, the impact that changes in technology had on recorded music. But we just published this thing called Too Big to Fail, which is a sort of musicians and citizens guide to the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger. And I brought a bunch of them, so if anybody wants to come up after we're done, and I'll stop talking now, and have a look at it, it basically describes, you know, some of the things that led up to this massive merger, and also, you know, ways that the community can actually plug in at the federal level to inform the policymakers about what's really happening out there in the really real world. Because the thing is, you actually have to get yourself to a place where you feel comfortable collecting data, telling stories at the state level, and being prepared to direct your advocacy to the federal level where possible, whether in district or if you can come to DC. Because these people will listen to you. It's just that they haven't heard from you. So that's my spiel.
Hello. I actually, can y'all hear me? Yeah? Okay. So I actually have a small slideshow that I prepared for you all. It's much easier for us to describe the relationship between Media Justice League and Local 782. Media Justice League is based in San Antonio, Texas, where Clear Channel also calls home. So we kind of feel like we're the experts talking about post-Clear Channel after 1996. So I'm going to go ahead and just stop talking for a moment, and I'm going to talk with the slideshow. So we started in 2005. We were actually seeded by the United Church of Christ and the, can y'all hear this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, can you turn it on? In 2005, there was a huge FCC hearing, and over 500 people stood in line for 12 hours to talk to the FCC. So from that, the Media Justice League was formed, and it took several years up until now. 5 years later, we're still trying to figure out what's going on. So this is a short video about us. So what I want to talk about, and this is really all I have to say about working in the local music community, that it's important to start small. We're still struggling with what the size and capacity of doing this work is. We, even as organizers working in a local music community and the local scene, get into arguments about critical mass, because sometimes we'll have meetings that are 3 of us, and sometimes we'll have meetings where there's 60 of us, and that messes with morale. So I think that what's really important is to take home, if you're going to be getting into working in local music, local media, and local culture, is to think about size, that if it's small, it's okay. It's about who's there, it's more important. When we do get the people, and we do get them, like I said, our meetings can be anywhere from 60 to 120 people. We like to ask the question, in a perfect world where local media works, who's there? Because it's really easy to come to these meetings, and we call them bitch sessions, where everybody just comes, and for 2 hours they will vet about what's wrong with local music, what's wrong with local media. There's a lot of finger pointing and aiming and blaming, but that doesn't really get to a solution of how we're going to fix what's wrong. So we like to use this really simple question. If the music scene was what you wanted today, if the media was covering what you wanted to cover, what would those stories be? Who would be the people writing it? If the venues were working the way you wanted the venues to work, who would be running the venues? So one of the reasons that we had to develop an organizing model for musicians is because we didn't have one. So this is the musicians actually working on something that we call the affinity model. This came from 6 months to a year of meeting every Monday for a year. And what we need an organizing model is that musicians have a different issue as a community organizer or as a journalist or as another person just working for a nonprofit. A musician, A, usually has a day job or something that they're doing as a musician. B, they have their band, which they're supposed to be running like a business. So there's a lot of work that goes into running a band. And then there's the aspect of them being a community organizer and an advocate. So if you're expecting for a musician or anybody in the creative industry, whether it's a photographer or a writer, to get engaged in community activism or to be one of those volunteers, you have to consider that they are going to be wearing 3 to 5 hats at one time. And so where do they fit in? So one of the ideas that we came up with was this affinity model where we saw how a musician there might be a musician who wants to write a press release, but there also might be a musician that wants to do production distribution. So we have this 4 working group organizing model, which we call affinity model. There's an online organizing group, and this is how it's mapped out. There could be a person in each one of those squares. Those are the people who like to jump online and do Facebook and MySpace and Twitter. They're comfortable in cyberspace doing their organizing. The second group is media relations. Those are the people who want to build relationships with the Casey or the Chris, the music editors. They like to write the press releases. They're really comfortable with doing those sorts of communications. The next one is field building. I always say it's the least popular working group, but it's my favorite working group. That's the working group that goes back to that question. In an ideal world where everything was the way it was supposed to be, who would be there? You're working with the policy people, you're going to conferences. It's more of a mover and a shaker. It's where the politics are, and a lot of musicians still are not comfortable with getting involved with politics, especially if you define it as politics, but that doesn't mean that they don't care. And then the last working group is production and distribution, because how can you make media and make music if somebody's not like producing and distributing it? And 2 working groups that you won't see there is fundraising, because we kind of feel like everybody should be fundraising if you're involved in this. Another way, and administration, which is always going to be a challenge when you're organizing large groups of people. So 5 years forward to where we are today, 2011, we started out with nothing, 1 person, 1 staff. Today we have a staff of 3. We have our own office space in central downtown. We're managing multiple websites. Like these are not all of them. There's Media Justice League. There's Local Media Month, which is a national holiday we've declared in April. And there's Local 782. They have their own website. We have, like I said, we have multiple websites and Facebook and Twitter and so forth. That's just a few. And just to show you what is possible, Local Music Week, which is 1 week out of Local Media Month. We did it last year, and we're doing it again this year. And it's a week-long event where everybody in the city gets involved. The pink flyer on the left is last year, and that's just a snapshot of how many bands and how many venues got involved. And this year, we actually got sponsorship with our local alt-weekly, and the calendar's not even up yet, but it's going to be another week-long of bands, venues, writers, anybody and everybody that's involved working together, and that's how you can get a hold of us. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Michael Epstein. I'm a musician, and I've done a little bit of work. I founded a blog called Boston Band Crush a few years ago with the goal of really placing kind of a spotlight on local artists that were just kind of starting out. And one of the things I noticed in the course of my time in Boston, and I've been here about 12 years doing music, and I started out, not having any connections to anybody and sort of worked through all that. And what I found is there were a lot of great bands in Boston in terms of music. And many of those bands had been working at it for years, but still had really no idea how to interface with the media. They would expect that just by playing good shows and writing good songs and, existing, they would get coverage. They didn't really understand the publicity aspect of it. So one of the things we wanted to do with Boston Band Crush, which I founded with a couple of other people, is identify bands that are doing good work but are not really successful at kind of taking that next step to let people know about it. And we provided some of their first attention and first coverage. And so when we were doing this, one of the things that I really started thinking about is, why do we in bands care about getting media coverage? If we're making great music, shouldn't that be enough, right? What do we need? What do we need people paying attention to us? And I'm sure that you're all here because you believe that media is important, and I also believe that media is important. And I sort of came up with a list of reasons why I think bands do really need local coverage and national coverage to some extent as well to move forward. One of the things about music scene, we're using this term scene. If you ask me if Boston has a great music scene, I can list off 50 bands that are as good or better than almost every popular national band. If you ask an average person in town, they'll say, oh, Boston hasn't had a music scene since 1990 or whenever the last huge band came out of here. And that to me is sort of a mind-blowing thing, because how is there such a discrepancy between the way I view music here and the way that sort of the average person who's not out every night at shows views? So there are a few points that I just want to make about media to kind of generate thoughts and maybe discussion later. There's a tremendous psychological impact of media coverage. Even when we formed Boston Band Crush, literally all we did is go on to Blogger, start a new account. We made a silly hearts and unicorns logo at the top because we wanted to be the blog is all about love and not criticism. It's just to share information and to kind of spread joy about bands in town. So all we did was create that blog. Any of you could do that in 1 minute, no problem. Immediately, anything we wrote on there had some psychological impact and authority. People believed that it was suddenly important. I ended up with 1 million quotes on bands' press kits. What is my authority to write about music, really? I have no external objective authority at all. In fact, creating a blog and doing this is probably the least objectively authoritative approach, right? There's no external validator for that. But the way people view it is that it's immediately important, and immediately when we wrote about bands, they were very excited. They felt like they were kind of getting the attention that they needed. Second, I think that people need sort of taste validation. My experience in many cases with my own music was that I started a band called The Motion 6 several years ago. Most of my friends thought, oh yeah, I know lots of dudes in bands. It's probably just another crappy local band. We made our first record. I just mailed it out pretty much everywhere, hoping that somebody would care about it. It ended up getting picked up by Spin. Immediately, as soon as the first coverage by Spin happened, all of my friends started buying the record, caring about it. And that's such a strange thing, because it's not, the music is the same. I haven't done anything different. I'm the same guy that is just a jerk making music. There's nothing special about me. But it happened that one person that happened to receive that package at Spin liked, and from my perception, probably just one song on the record, and decided to write about it. But that external validation really was important. And I've had the same experience locally. I've had people that, I can think of a particular friend who always talked about how she was going to come to one of my shows. She said, oh yeah, I'm going to come to the next show. Never came to shows. We got written up in the Globe at this time, I think it was. And she happened to be a Globe reader. And she got really excited. She called me that day and is like, oh, you're in the Globe today. And I thought, oh, okay, whatever, who cares? But she was so excited about that she came to the show that night. That was like, that made it important enough. That made my creative work important enough for her to decide to come support it. And she wouldn't have done it otherwise, I think. So we have this sense that media is this unbiased sort of authoritative, takes this authoritative role in defining what is important in music, or in arts, or in really anything. In addition, local media, I think, is really uniquely qualified to define and write the history of music in an area. In Boston, we're lucky because we have a very long history of great music coming out of here, though most people don't know that there's anything past 1990. But one of the things that I find interesting is that we talk about history is written by the victors. One aspect of kind of local music history is looking at kind of the best bands or the most important bands at any one time. And there was one particular year, it was 2009, where my band, The Motion 6, we got the best local rock band in the Phoenix, actually, which was great and exciting. And we weren't on any of the other top 10 lists of albums that came out that year in any of the other magazines. And the same week as that came out, we lost in this battle of the bands called the Rock and Roll Rumble. So we lost in the first round. And people started asking me how we could be the best band, in the Phoenix. Yeah, I don't even know. Maybe it was probably online voting or something. It didn't have a lot of meaning, but it was viewed as authoritative, is what I'm sort of saying. I don't personally view it as authoritative. We didn't think we were the best band, but so anyway, I think that that just being identified in those outlets, even if it's one person saying, "Here's my top 10 list of the year," people don't view that as, oh, it's this guy. They don't look at the author of that article. They view it as the Phoenix saying, you know, the Phoenix is an important source of arts information, saying these are the best bands in town. These are the most important bands. So in a sense, they're really, the media is writing the history of important music in town. Even if they're incredible bands, if they're not covered in that way, nobody is going to recognize that, you know, down the road. They're not going to be on those lists. I think there's also a very symbiotic relationship between music and media, especially now as we move toward kind of the Facebook world and all these other places where if somebody writes an article about me, I spend a lot of energy promoting that article, telling people to go read it. So we send a lot of traffic over to, you know, the Phoenix's page or the Diggs page when we get covered. And I actually wonder, I mean, this is a question you can address maybe later, but I wonder if, in some sense, these media outlets, their bottom line is getting eyes on their content. And I wonder if covering local music, in this case, actually gets more eyes on their content than covering national music. Because if you're covering Britney Spears' new album, she may have a lot of fans and followers, but she's not telling people to go check out the Phoenix article. Whereas, you know, local bands are going to be doing that. So that's kind of my main points. I just want to say also that we are very, very lucky in Boston because we have a lot of different infrastructure for kind of supporting local music and local scene kind of work. We have writers and DJs and other people who are involved in those worlds who are really out every night at shows. I see them all the time, and that to me is the most important thing, that they're actually engaged in the environment that we're kind of being creative in. We have events. We have something called the Rock and Roll Social. Once a month, there's a kind of an informal gathering at a bar in Allston where people just kind of walk around and meet each other and give out CDs and talk about show trades and all the radio DJs. It was actually started by the commercial radio DJs who have local music shows. And they did that because they wanted to actually meet bands, not just have stuff sent in and kind of blindly listen through it. They wanted to actually know the bands that they were going to be playing and be engaged in that world. So I thought that was really great. We have other events like the Rock and Roll Rumble, which I mentioned that we lost when we were the best band that year. But it's sort of a battle of the bands. But the goal is really to have people meet, you know, from bands that are kind of doing well, all kind of play together on shows that they wouldn't normally be booked on, meet each other, and a lot of different collaborations and things have come out of that. There's something called One Night Band, which other towns have, something called the Rock Lottery. It's sort of based on that, where 40 musicians are thrown randomly into bands of 5 people in the morning one day, and they have all day to write 3 songs and learn 1 cover, and then that night they perform sets. And bands have formed out of this. People have, you know, again, met people in other bands that have kind of done collaborations afterwards. So I really feel very lucky to be part of what's going on in Boston. And if anybody says that we don't have a good music scene, they just probably are sitting at home watching TV every night, not going out. So thanks.
I think first I'm from Oakland, originally from New York, and I guess I want to look at it this way. Like Casey was saying, I've been around long enough to have been through several generational moments that I think kind of underscore this topic. And I'll start with, you know, going back to the 70s and hip hop, where I started out as an MC. And just thinking about it, when you really look at the title of this panel, is the impact of local media on culture. The reason why hip hop culture showed up in the first place was because the local media was ignoring a significant portion of its population. I mean, you know, when you look at the whole history, and I don't need to go through it verse and chapter, but that was pretty much a reaction to it. You know, local radio was looking and saying, you know, we're going to play this disco stuff, and, you know, we're going to try and capitalize off the John Travolta moment in time and Studio 54, and, you know, we're going to stop calling the radio stations black and use the word urban and, you know, go for a different type of demographic. And the result was a bunch of people, whether they could articulate it or not, realizing that they weren't seeing themselves reflected in media. And this is really important for many communities of color in particular. The access to talk to the masses has always been limited, and it's always been challenged. And so in many communities, culture becomes your main communication form. It becomes the artists that reflect the sentiments and the values and what people are thinking, and you put a lot of emphasis on it. And so when James Brown says, "I'm black and I'm proud," it's a really big thing. You know, if Public Enemy says, "Fight the power," it really means something, because you don't have other figures in places that people would frequent, or at least you're going to have access to in terms of media, that are going to be able to say some of the things your artists often say. So there's a real importance there. And when you look at it historically, whenever our communities have stepped up and started to have that really reflected, there's always been something to come along to take away from it. You know, there's always a change in the format. And so we found this out when between the years 1967 and 1980, when Dr. King gave a speech to the Association of Radio and Television Broadcasters, and he says in his speech that had it not been for these radio jocks and the music that they were playing, that the civil rights movement would not have happened. He talks about the music that they were playing brought people together. It helped further integration, that this was important, and he starts naming off all these local DJs from around the country and talks about the roles that they played. By 1980, when Minister Farrakhan talks to the same body of DJs, he's smashing on them because they moved away from being these community reflectors, and their music wasn't no longer speaking to the community, and they were more about this old saying, well, it's not an old saying, it's one that you hear now, more music, less talk. You know, more music, less talk, and here's your top 10. And that was heralded in the 70s as a new way to really deliver music, and that was held up to high esteem. But it was devastating to the communities that were like, we're more than just 10 songs, and we don't want to just hear more music. We want to have this whole entire package that reflects our values and mores and what have you. So I bring all this up to say that when you fast forward through the other generational moments, most notably, you know, the 1996 Telecommunications Act, you're looking at, again, communities that are saying to themselves, damn, we're being screwed once again, because almost overnight you started to see the format change. You started to see that access was not available for the public, and that you started to see that the artists were no longer speaking directly or reflecting the people in those communities. Why? Because half the time those artists weren't even from the community. So at the same time that this has always been happening, you've always found people fighting back and finding a way to do things. And I think when you go to different cities, you can find it manifest itself different ways. I think Chris and brother over here spoke about how they were doing it in Boston. DeAnne here talks about what they were doing in San Antonio. But you can pick any city on the map, and you go, what did they do in Chicago? And you would see that there is a movement. I remember when local artists were fighting against House of Blues, and they were demanding that local artists be there, and that they went on the air, and some of the DJs got suspended because local artists weren't being played. I remember in Detroit when they had Blackout Fridays, same thing, because local artists weren't being played, and they went up there and struck and picketed the station and demanded that local artists be played. And you can go all the way around. Los Angeles, similar type of situations. So the question that we need to be asking, why is this continually going on? What has happened, in my opinion, is that, and I think you used the word ecosystem, there's this ecosystem that exists in many of our communities. Artists bring culture, and then the media is supposed to pick that up and reflect that, and then we all feel good. what's happened is that you've had a violation of that culture, or you have a violation of that ecosystem continuously, where corporate interests come in and they go, we have 782, they have a process, they have a structure, but we're only going to pick you, put you on our thing because you satisfy our agenda, and it may undercut the work that you all have been doing there, and then that creates an imbalance. And what happens is that the rest of the community all of a sudden takes their attention off of local work and organizing and start looking for the big shining light that is called media. Local radio, local television, BET shows up, all these different types of things. And so instead of honoring the type of work that's going on and saying, you know what, there's something organic that has taken place. Let us enhance that organic situation and bring it to the public. We just come along as a corporate entity and pick, choose, shut it down, omit, highlight. Sometimes we demonize. Sometimes we give credit where credit isn't due, and all those different types of things. So I think a challenge that I often tell, I think a challenge that we have is strengthening our relationship, if we're media, with the artists, and making sure that the artists themselves stop depending upon corporate interests that don't always have their interests, and understand that they will oftentimes use the artists or exploit them to further their economic gain. What do I mean by that? When I worked at Clear Channel, we looked around the terrain, said, wow, we need to move the station up a little bit. What can we do? Well, I don't want to go to East Oakland and start passing out flyers. I don't want to go to the hood and start, networking with people and get them to listen to the station. Why don't we play some of these local artists for a few months? They'll go out and do all the promotion. And in doing so, those artists, so happy to be on the air, actually forget about all the other local efforts that were going on. So they bypass the college radio station. They stop showing up for interviews with the local paper. They don't want to go to the local cable access show. They're all looking forward to the big, prize in the sky presented by a Clear Channel or BET or MTV. And then what happens is, after they go around and tell their family and friends, I'm on KMEL or I'm on this Clear Channel station, and they promote it and send out a tweet and send out Facebook updates and the whole nine, the infrastructure that was originally supporting them dies on the grapevine, and then the radio station looks around and goes, okay, you helped your community form a habit, now we can cut you off and go back to our original business plan, which is to satisfy another corporation called the major record labels. Is this making sense what I'm saying? And this is, okay, so in the Bay Area, where I'm at, I think we've been pretty lucky because we have some activists, we have some pretty savvy people, and it's all about the hustle. And so over the years, when these things have happened, there have been these moments when people looked around and said, we'll do our own damn thing. In 1988, there was a group of us on college radio who saw that we were starting to get outflanked. We formed the Bay Area Hip Hop Coalition, put all our nuts and bolts together, and pretty much made the major labels understand that if you send a record to one person and don't send it to the rest of us, you ain't getting played at all. And then we started putting out our own publication. It started out as the Davey D Beat Report, then it became the Bay Area Beat Report, but it was our own way of bringing life to the activities that we were doing. At the same time, you had a lot of artists who also started doing their own radio shows. There's a whole history in the Bay of artists who are doing their radio shows. Digital Underground members, Money B and DJ Fuse, had their own radio show. Paris, the Black Panther of hip hop, had his own radio show. MC Hammer had his own radio show. We can go down the list. It's just a long list, but what this meant is that a lot of times the artists were able to bring to life their own activity. You had some other artists like the Living Legends who were putting out their own little information about what they were doing. And so this became, kind of like a model, whether it was intended, but it became an inspiration. Like, okay, if you don't want to cover me, I'll cover my damn self. And that became a very good thing. You also had a number of artists who were very close to the community as well. Many of them have broken a lot of ground. So the Bay Area is home to a Jeff Chang, who was covering local artists. The Bay Area is home to a Eric Arnold. I think we're Eric somewhere in the back here. There he is. So there's the original editor of 4080 and somebody who was writing for the SF Weekly and others who are consistently putting local artists, in their columns. Myself, I would be another person, a guy named JR, my boy T Cash. So there's a whole list. Danielle Smith comes out of the Bay. And so there's been these symbiotic relationships that have happened over the years that have allowed at least local artists to have some sort of platform. But let me just close by saying as we go into 2011 or 2012, things have changed a little because you have habits that have been formed. And you also have people looking, I think, for the next big thing. I think somebody said there's a psychological aspect when you get played. So it used to be like, okay, you're on YouTube, that's a big thing. You're on Facebook, that's a great thing. But now you got people that they really want to be famous. They want to be the next Lady Gaga. They want to be the next, 50 Cent or whoever. And in their pursuit in doing that means that oftentimes they will break that symbiotic relationship with the people that have initially supported them. And then the corporations are glad to go along with it. So you all of a sudden will have a big name artist, and a corporate entity, the major label, or even the radio station goes, don't do these local things, otherwise we won't play you on the Clear Channel station. Don't go here because money's been paid, so you need to exclusively, show your face in this video, but not in the other things. So that becomes a problem, that whole payola, pay-for-play type of situation that we need to address. At the same time, some of the writers, some of the journalists have gotten caught up, and want to be as famous as the artist. And so sometimes they're using artists as a stepping stone themselves to get to higher places, and sometimes that trust gets broken as well. So where are we at right now? I think first we have to reevaluate the relationship that we have, and what is it that we really want? Are we trying to do a business? Or are we trying to build community that's going to be long-lasting? Are we trying to do something that's going to be real quick? Or are we trying to do something that's going to be an institution that all of us can benefit years down the road? Where are we 5, 10 years down the road? Are we still having a conversation like we are today? Or are we having a conversation that talks about, well, 782 is now 1 million people strong. How can we grow that even bigger? Or what TV station will you buy? Or radio station will you buy? Or will we have a discussion about the Bay and figure out, well, gee, which radio property can we sell to somebody because we all pooled our resources and started taking it to the next level? I think those are the type of conversations that we need to have. And then lastly, I'll say that this conversation goes beyond a song and a dance. And I think oftentimes it gets reduced to that. We're looking for the artist to do the song, the dance, and then we should be happy. No, we're looking for more than that when we're talking, at least in communities of color. We're looking for the artist to do the song and the dance, but we're also looking for the conversation and the presentation that really meets our needs and our desires. Is that making sense too, what oftentimes doesn't happen? We don't need more music, less talk. We need, you to talk a little bit about the government being shut down, and we need to hear the perspective of the people in the community, how they're going to get their next check. And oh, by the way, here's some music that is actually a soundtrack to what's going on versus, Britney Spears doesn't have enough money to do her tour. Let's be sad for her. Lindsay Lohan may go to jail. And by the way, Kim Kardashian is getting married, and here's the next song by Lady Gaga. That's a disconnect. That's a disconnect, and culture in its purest form was supposed to be a counter to that. It was supposed to look at that and say, fuck that. That's not what we want. We need to have something else. And then we did that for a while, and then we kind of got caught up in this matrix of gossip and nonsense and misdirection. And so I think we need to change that. And I'll just close by giving a big shout out to all the people that step up in the Bay that I know of. 38 Notes is a great website that covers a lot of Bay Area stuff. We Are the West. We Are the West is a great one. Youth Radio, All Day Play Radio, they put all the local DJs on so that we have a space on that. Of course, KPFA, Pacifica would be another place where you can find home to the Friday Night Vibe, Hard Knock Radio, and the Sideshow, all shows that do local stuff. KMEL was forced to put on their home turf show, which is actually named after a TV show from the 80s where they did local coverage. And just one thing, how KMEL, Clear Channel, came to playing local artists was twofold. First, There was a day and time where people were looking, this was maybe back in '99, where local artists were like, these guys ain't playing us. And they showed up about 30, 40 deep to the station and pretty much was demanding, we need to have airplay. The station people tried to give them the song and dance, oh, we got to do research, and you're not in the Billboard magazine, and give them all that stuff. And, you know, some of the jocks pulled them to the side, gave them a conversation, told them to show up the next day with a suit and tie. They sat down in a meeting and said, look, we need to figure out how to work this out. The bosses at the time, the Clear Channel bosses, said this is a business, and this is how we got to do things. Those guys countered and said, well, coming into our community will be a business. And so you can't have access to the community unless we start to get some airplay. If this doesn't happen, then those vans that you bring out to East Oakland, there's going to be a problem. You come out to the Mission, there's going to be a problem. We're going to make it very uncomfortable, and they were putting that type of pressure on. So, you know, a couple of days later, there was a conversation had, and then we were able to do a local show. And that was really the result of the local artists saying, you don't put anything on, we're going to make it hurt for you. And then we also had later on, a couple of years later, a local radio station that came up and then said we can make inroads by playing local artists, only to be bought out by one of the former managers of Clear Channel, who I think, Dan, Eric, you wrote the story, but if I'm correct, he came in there and like that day bought the station and shut it down, right? Pretty much. Yeah, just really walked in there. But, you know, this is all documented and you know, covered. But my last point is that it's going to be up to us to continuously revisit this conversation and not leave it to chance, because outside forces have another agenda, which is to commodify us so that we can be statistics so that they can sell advertising. I don't want to be anybody's ad statistic, especially when there's so much needs in our community. The artist, it's got to be more than just you doing a song and a dance. You're going to have to reflect the sentiments of the community, because oftentimes your music is a reflection of the struggle of the community, so you can't divorce yourself from that just because you're on MTV and BET the next day. You're telling our stories collectively. You got to give back more than just by doing a good song. So I'll leave it at that, and we can continue some more conversation.
Thanks, Davey.
All right, so my name's Chris Faraone. I'm a reporter with the Boston Phoenix. I cover everything, but I'm the hip-hop guy there. I also run a blog called Jump the Turnstile, which is me. I do it with the other hip-hop writers in Boston from the other papers, which is, you know, a lot of people find that interesting. Yeah, and we don't always get along, but, you know, we try to go out once a week, and so we get that going. So, you know, I'm a big cheerleader of the Boston music scene, New England music scene, just underground music in general. I was going to open up by kind of like reeling off a list of, you know, just Boston artists that, you know, started, that the Phoenix wrote about first, or the Weekly Dig did, but then it's just, I figured, like, it's all of them. You know, everything has to start somewhere. You know, or on a blog. You know, this stuff all has to start somewhere. You know, the big magazines, and well, I'll get to that in a minute. They like to pretend sometimes they discovered something. You know, they didn't discover anything, and now we could prove it. Just, you know, look it up online. But I basically want to go through. Oh, I also want to thank you guys for having, you know, me on the panel. Hip hop gets forgotten a lot, and in Boston, it's a really tough scene. There's like, if the Middle East, which is our big non-Clear Channel, non-Live Nation venue, if they went out of business tomorrow, there would barely be one venue that could hold a hip hop show. You know, and some of it is for, you know, understandable reasons, but some of it, it's like, you know, there are club owners who just won't do hip hop shows, and that's their prerogative. But so, you know, I'm glad to participate here. I just want to go over 3 things in my time. The first is, and this picks up where you left off. The first is, you know, I kind of go, when I'm writing about music, I kind of go with in my head I'm saying, you know, the world doesn't need another Kanye West article. You know, the world doesn't need another Vampire Weekend article. Oh, by the way, just to clarify things, I only write about hip-hop. I listen to other kinds of music, but I hate when indie rock writers write about hip-hop because they suck at it. It's the worst. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, regardless of if I like Kanye West or not, you know, it's almost embarrassing to see. I'll be in like another city and I'll open up a newspaper. It's like, really, guys? I mean, everybody. There's so much. There's so much in every city that you could be writing about. I'm at the clubs. I'm 31 years old. I've been here for 7 years. I'm still at the clubs like 2-3 nights a week. And you're right. You can, you know, you could write. I could write about Kid Cudi all day long. He's not going to retweet my story. And I don't know the numbers as to what it does for the Phoenix when we write about local bands and stuff, but I know, when you look at the shares, the Facebook shares, and, there's a really good rap group out of Emerson right now called Fameless Fam. And when we write about them, I swear it's like the whole campus shares that damn thing. There'll be like 150 shares in 20 minutes. So I think, definitely, you're on point with that. It's true, and I don't understand why more people don't realize it. The next thing I wanted to get into, actually, on that note, still, it blows me away because I'm a journalist. I write about other stuff too, and with everything else, with investigative stuff, it's all about the scoop. But when it comes to music, it's like, they're not scooping anything. They're writing about the same thing. They're rehashing press releases. It's not hard to beat the Boston Globe on hip hop coverage. Fox News often gets to hip hop, Boston hip hop, before the Boston Globe does. So I've always forget about taking pride in it. This is something I like doing. I feel I'm a battle here, and I want to write about people first. The second thing I wanted to get to is local reporters like me, I feel, make the best national reporters. So over the years, I've covered hip hop for I can go on magazines, Mass Appeal, Elemental, The Source, YRB. I've even written an article trashing the New York Times' hip-hop coverage for Columbia Journalism Review. It's like what I brought to those, of course I would write about other stuff for them too. I write about artists from everywhere, but every chance I got, I was writing about Boston artists. I wore my Special Teams shirt today, which is like one of my favorite Boston hip-hop groups, and I was the one who got to write about them for Spin, for The Source. And as a result, I think I got it right, or at least more right. How many people here have read an article in a national publication about a local band they know and been like, they fucked everything up. Everything is wrong. Terminology is one of the biggest rappers around here. And he's from Lawrence, which is not Boston. He raps about being from Lawrence. Yeah, he's done some time on this scene, but it's unbelievable. It's a different city. It's 45 minutes away. And you rarely read an article about terminology where they don't say he's from Boston. That's just like, so, sure they cover these things, but they cover them as a commodity. They'll cover one little thing. Slane's probably our biggest rapper in Boston, and he was in a couple of Ben Affleck movies. So all of a sudden everybody's writing about him, and it's like, they don't even sometimes check the articles that have been written previously. I know this because I wrote them. And this is kind of an opportunity when you're writing for these big publications, but when you're on the ground, this is an opportunity to really, I hate the term master narrative, but like to write that blueprint. This is what the Wikipedia page is going to be built on. So, it's a big responsibility, but, and also, by the way, I'm not advising that anyone go and like put up with the bullshit dealing with Spin or any of those publications. But if you want to, it's a good thing. Because you're in the right, you're in the right place in your local market. And the third thing I wanted to touch on is that for me, especially in Boston, excuse me, I had like chorizo this morning. For me, especially in Boston, being a local music reporter is like anything but just writing about music. We've got like the future of music happening here. I cover all the hack days at MIT. I'm writing a big article right now about this company called Echo Nest, which is just, it's almost undescribable how important they are in the future of music. They're based out of Somerville, and Island Def Jam basically just handed over their catalog and said they're like a gateway between the labels and app developers. And so these are, and also that's on the technology side. On the other side, music for me has led to a lot of the investigative stuff I've done. I've covered first of all, things like what all you do, organizations. I've gotten articles. I do a lot of college radio, and a lot of dudes who are locked up listen to college radio because they don't want to hear Jay-Z talking about his new car on Jammin'. They want to, they listen to college radio. And as a result of that, when it's come time for some stories to, get out from behind the wall, I've been the one who they hit up. And it's about, for me, I'm in those communities that I'm covering. I'm not just at the shows. I'm at the, the poetry nights, the spoken word stuff, artists working with local politicians. So for me, it's not just about covering the music at all. And I can't stress how important I think it is to go to shows, but it's everything that happens around those shows. We unfortunately had two murders in the hip hop community in Boston in the past month, and for me, it wasn't just about writing about your standard obit. It was kind of like, and I usually don't play this heavy of a hand, but I've been covering kind of like the peace movement, the Peace Boston movement is what it's called, for years now. And for me, it was like, all right, guys, it's time to step it up. It's every time that people get together, like kind of like Davey says, people forget all the dudes who move up and out. And and the last thing I'll just say before handing it over is, Boston's hip hop scene is one of those things. Like you say it about rock, but there's still the Dropkick Murphys and stuff like that. I mean, there are bands that come out. When it comes to Boston hip hop, I mean, people look at me like I'm crazy that I cover Boston hip hop. I mean, if you're not in the know, it's like what, Ed O.G., Marky Mark, Good Vibrations type of shit, and the big question is, when's Boston gonna blow up? When's Boston and if Boston had one big stupid hit, I think it would be more embarrassing than anything else. I mean, I think that whole question just totally. I mean, it speaks not at all about. I mean, I could go on and on. Mr. Liff, Acrobatic. These are guys who call this home. They tour the world. I don't know how much money they make, but I know they make a lot of money. All these guys, as far as just doing verses with other MCs. Ed O.G. and Big Shug go to Europe for 2 months a year. So the whole question, when's Boston going to blow? There is a great scene here, and it's still being nurtured, but. It's here, and I'm happy. Hey, there are a couple other writers that cover it, but I'm glad to have first pick, and to break artists doesn't get better than that for me. That's that.
Yeah.
I think Chris said something that's real important, and we were talking about this last night, and something just for people to consider. Consolidation has resulted in everything being homogenous to the point that it's stale. I remember when I grew up in New York, I could go to South Street Seaport, and there was a big fat Italian dude that sold fish, right? And you went there because he had that personality. It was the only place in the world where you could get that fish. Just like when you go to Pike Market up in Seattle, it's the only place where they're throwing the fish around. And, I just remember I go there one day, and the damn mall looks just like the mall in San Francisco. It has a Starbucks, a Boston eatery, and, the whole thing. And the Big Al Fish guy is not even there anymore, right? And so something was lost. And when it looks at music, the same thing. Like we were just talking, like you come to Boston's rap scene. What I like about Boston's rap scene is you got these grimy white dudes who sound like they're from the hood, but they're not trying to be from the hood. And because it reflects the blue collar mentality of some of these folks, like a Slang. Right. It's a working class thing. And I think that's a unique thing. When I go to Houston, I spend a lot of time in Texas, and you have a whole scene there. Dallas is different than Houston's thing. I like hearing the music slow down, and I like having that whole type of Screw thing when Screw is around, and I like hearing that flavor, and I don't want to hear Oakland flavor in Houston. And when we come to the Bay, it's diverse. So you can have somebody who sounds as country as day and somebody who sounds as backpack as night in the same city. Hyro and Too Short live in Oakland, and you're supposed, and that reflects our diversity. And so I think what happens is we as people have gotten used to having a standard set by a corporation that has homogenized us. And so we wind up saying things like, well, Seattle's scene is no longer in existence, or Boston's scene is dead, or when's the Bay going to come back, when these things are going on. Like us, we have people that travel the world. Michael Franti will bring 60,000 people to his show. Living Legends is big news in Australia and in New Zealand. They're huge. And so we do have those success stories, and I think in each of your cities, there are those success stories. As media advocates and as media reformers, we have a responsibility to demand that be reflected in in our respective communities. We should be going, you need to be highlighting and making sure that those unique voices that make Boston different than Oakland, Oakland different than San Antonio, is accurately reflected. And as you said, so that you can get that blueprint when it does go national, that you don't have, as we had, E40, who's from Vallejo, being called an Oakland rapper, which is like, you know, that's not the same thing. He's not from Oakland, and you know, to people in New York, they don't care, but to somebody in the Bay, it was like a real fucking big deal. It caused a little tension for a while, because it's like you trying to claim, you know, Oakland when you're not from there. So I think we all have to be media advocates in that respect as well. It starts with us changing our mindset and how we start viewing, you know, our values.
Maybe we should talk and, you know, a little bit more about what can be done at this point, you know, because, you know, the thing that's happening in the background here that I'm surprised no one has brought up, and I'm surprised I didn't bring it up when I first started talking, is that we're looking at a situation where actual critical infrastructure for local artists and creative persons in local communities across the country is being threatened by decisions that are being made in Washington. We're talking about Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We're talking about NPR. And if you want to split fine hairs about this stuff and say it's about Juan Williams, it's about this or that or the other, no, it's about, even if you're for like completely DIY public media, which my organization, Future of Music, is. We supported low power radio licenses, all this stuff. It's really great. Open internet stuff, do for yourself all the way. There is still a need to invest in infrastructure at the local level that can give artists that important leg up. NPR and CPB are certainly part of that infrastructure, and the important thing now is to not quibble about, you know, what is or what isn't, you know, quality local media. It's not to do the circular firing squad thing. It's to start pulling in the same direction, making our case, and saying that, look, this has economic relevance across the country, that not just for artists, but we live in your communities. We're drivers of not just culture, of actual economics and dollars. We need representation, and we need that, you know, entrepreneurial ability to get on, you know, these platforms. And that's something that, you know, there's no one way to do it. DeAnne is practically the expert in bringing together, you know, and harnessing people's, you know, desires and to participate. And I can't tell you how to do it, but I can tell you that in Washington, it's important that this energy gets directed to the policymakers. I mean, just and it doesn't matter if you're indie rock or hip hop or whatever. You know, we had, you know, our friends at Dead Prez, Stickman filing comments on net neutrality at the FCC. That's important. We had our friends in the Decemberists writing a letter to Congress, you know, telling them not to screw with the internet and to you know not to defund public radio and public media. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, if the movement that is getting coordinated and built at events like NCMR can be channeled in the right directions, you know, there's tremendous opportunity. But we can't ignore the fact that it's gotten a lot worse in just recent months than it has in years.
Casey makes a really good point because I think everybody on the panel mentioned the 96 Telecommunications Act and what happened with Clear Channel because it had such a big impact, and that's just, it's a classic example of one of those policy decisions that really affected everything in the communities. And it's true with net neutrality, with broadband access, you know, we spent a lot of time talking about the changes in radio, but I think everybody on the panel here is also talking about all the stuff that's happening online. You know, we still have a lot of communities that don't have internet access at all. They can't connect to the internet in any way other than dial-up, and if you haven't tried to use the internet on dial-up nowadays, it just doesn't work. It's not built for that anymore. I have a couple of quick questions that I wanted to throw out to the panel, and then I think we can open it up for questions from the audience. But your presentations were excellent, by the way. Round of applause, perhaps, for everybody. It was awesome. I actually had a really hard time in titling this panel. I mean, it was easy in the fact that it rhymed. What does it all mean for the music scene? I was like, oh, that's great. But I had some difficulty using the word scene because I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about music scenes or music communities, and I don't know if people view them as different things, because to me I think, you know, we've used the terms sort of interchangeably, but it seems like to some extent the mainstream media is often responsible for creating some sort of one-size-fits-all definition of what a music scene is. And what everybody here is talking about is the music community. You know, it's about the artists, it's about the venues, it's about the poetry nights, it's about all of the other stuff that's going on. And a lot of the different things that came up are about how these communities come together, whether it's the convenings like the Rumble or the Social, you know, people forming new bands, going to battles, like all these things are bringing people together. And I think that what Local 782 does is an excellent example of what can happen when musicians are coming together. And like Davey said, you're looking at it as not just, are we running a business, or are we building a community? Are we making something bigger? And maybe folks could just talk a little bit about that. DeAnne, I don't know if you want to talk a bit about some of the things that you guys have worked on, campaigns in the city of San Antonio specifically.
How many people here are familiar with Austin, live music capital of the world? All right. So that's a self-proclaimed title. They gave themselves that title. And so imagine what it's like to be a musician in San Antonio, 45 minutes away in the shadow of live music capital of the world. If you talk to the people who are actually part of the creative class economy in San Antonio, they will argue that our music scene is more diverse than in Austin, because most of the people in Austin are transplants from other cities, and a lot of the students that go there start bands, and then those bands end, and so forth. But I would like to use Austin as an example of some of the things that everybody up here talked about is this idea of this groundswell, organizing local to locally, and then getting that information that we collect up to the policymakers at the federal level. Because a lot of the things that people don't understand about Austin, one, that it's a self-proclaimed title, two, that they have passed local resolutions in Austin to say that you must make local music a priority. Like, they went to their city council, they formed these committees.
Seattle's done that too.
Right, other cities have done that. Like, there's actually processes that you can start in your own local community to replicate, if you want to replicate what Austin has done. And in San Antonio, I think what we have agreed upon is if we want to embrace what Austin has, we'll go to Austin. Like, if you want to move to Austin, we'll move to Austin, you'll play in Austin, you'll come back, but you'll go to Austin. You'll go to Austin, and it's like that in other cities, right? Like, we can all name that city, like, from Boston, you'll go to New York, but she'll come back, right? Okay, so there you go. So, like, there's always that place. So I think it's really interesting for us in San Antonio. What we'd like to do is we'd like for you to stay. We'd like for you to, because I think of it this way: if everybody that's cool in San Antonio, from the music scene to the journalists, to the policymakers, to the lawyers, if everybody that was actually changing and impacting my city was to leave, who's going to stay and make it into that place where we want to live? So one of the goals for Local 72 now is trying to work collaboratively with groups like Future Music Coalition. We follow leaders like Davey D online. There is some pushback in our own community about Local 72's agenda. I mean, we get crap all the time. They'll be like, how come you're always talking about Pop Pistol, which is a band that's here at the conference, and some of them are sitting in the front row? Or how come you always talk about Girl Coma? Like, they think that in San Antonio, like, we get knee-jerk reactions, like, how come you're always talking about that same band? And then the editors and the music writers who write about us, they get, challenged by the community. How come you're always covering these people? And I don't think that any one band is getting more attention. I don't really believe that there's any favoritism going on from the media. I think the bands who are doing the work, who are going to the meetings, who are volunteering their time, who are establishing one-on-one relationships with the journalists, who are building a narrative about themselves, you're hearing about them because they're doing what he's talking about. They're changing that psychological representation, so they're getting themselves out there in the community. And I wish more musicians would get off their butt and kind of do what these musicians are doing, which is working really, really hard, to shape their own voice and shape their own representation in the media, because it really comes down to, like, doing the work and putting the time in.
Thanks. Do we have questions from the audience?
I like the term cultural ecosystem. Could you speak a little bit more about how artists and local media, and I'm involved in radio and want to be involved with LPFM a little bit more, how they can work with sort of businesses and other constituencies in their immediate community to work towards sort of cultural sustainability, knowing that without the big players, the national players, the corporate players, which I don't think that many of us are interested in, that there's not necessarily a whole lot of money involved here, but that it's really important to the community and the artists and the venues for this work to continue.
I mean, there's a lot of ways to answer that. I mean, some of it is real big, and some of it is real small. For example, one of the things I like about 38 Notes, which is one of the websites, and other people have done this in the Bay as well, is you talk to the local artist, for example, and you're like, look, can I get permission to put out a mixtape, and let's put this out there so it's mutual promotion for everybody, the website as well as you as an artist. That's very simple. That's been going on for a long time. But it's the conversation that counts. You know, it's the building of trust and having mutual expectations of one another. When I was doing work in Texas, down in Houston, we did a documentary around voting. And we had targeted a couple of communities. And one of the things was going to a Bun B and other people and going, can I use your video in this documentary? And can we get, and that becomes a business in itself. Record Turnout came out because of those, the celebrity was strategically being used with the help of those artists. I've seen collaborations take place where, for example, we used to have a lot of violence in some of the shows. And there's been meetings with, you know, law students and artists and promoters and people coming up with white papers where, you know, you have these different arms all coming together to create a climate that's going to be beneficial for business. And so I think it's really about relationship 101 and then people being clear about their assets and then what other people's assets are and how you can build it up. If Chris is covering a story, for example, and I'm a local artist, then, you know, what's my relationship with him? And how can his coverage of the story maybe enhance some other things that are going on so that maybe that could lead to additional people coming to the city to maybe do shows, et cetera, et cetera. I think what happens is many times we operate in silos and we don't talk. A lot of times what I find problematic with activists, they only want to talk to artists when they want them to do a free show for their situation. And then they're not even talking to them. Like, you should come out and do the anti-war show. You know, or they're complaining that the artists themselves haven't done any songs. But then the question becomes to those activists, did you buy their CD? Did you actually listen to their album? Did you go to any of their shows? You know, so what was your point of reference when you came to evaluating them? You know, I remember somebody was saying once to me, Snoop Dogg is fucked up, you know, he needs to be more conscious. It's like, well, here's Snoop's anti-war song. Did you know he did one? So before you made that evaluation, did you even know that he did one? And maybe you could have used that as a tool, you know, just to attract people who were his fans to your movement, had you, you know, but we're not really listening to each other a lot of times. And that's what I meant when I said relationship 101. And then lastly, for the media folks, you know, the people that's on this panel, the Eric Arnolds of the world that's out there and others, they're good conduits because a lot of times they're in both circles. You know, they know where the artists are coming from, and oftentimes they're talking to the activists, and they can sometimes be a go-between. You know, these artists are this way, that way, and the other way, so you need to approach them this way, and vice versa. And sometimes if you have that healthy relationship with people who have your values, I think you can really have a healthy business, collaboration, community, if you're looking at that as an end game.
I want to talk just a little bit about resources. I mean, two things I want to point out, because I know Casey has a summit, and the Future Music Summit, I think, is one of the best things you can go to if you want to talk about multiple models for sustainability. And
October,
yeah,
DC.
If you want to learn how to make a living as a musician, I would, you know, definitely go there. But there are two things. If you're a musician, if you're in any creative industry nowadays, from being a journalist to being a musician to being a producer, a photographer, I mean, it's a business. The band is a business, and we teach bands and creatives alike that, like, you know, you need insurance. You need to figure out how much money do you want to make a year. Well, then how many months, you know, do you have to work out of the year, and how much month do you have to make? So it's a business. And you can't forget that. And, you know, Pop Pistol, again, they're here, but they have their managers with them. Teaches them that they have to pay themselves a stipend. They have to put money in a bank, and they have to drive the speed limit so that they don't spend all their tour money when they're driving, and, you know, doing the band in the van. You know, there's rules. And then another thing, if there's a book out there called Unmarketable by Anne Elizabeth Moore, who was 13 years the editor of Punk Planet magazine, and she talks about this idea of selling out, which is a really common term, you know, in the scene and in creative scenes. Like, did you take money from Starbucks? Well, then you're a sellout. You know, where are you on MTV? Where are you sellout? And she gets into the weeds with that idea. Like, if you're a band who takes money from Starbucks or Dos Equis, and you got no money, you know, are you selling out? And she talks about that, you know, in depth, about there's basically people with resources and there's people without, and it's not an easy question to answer.
I just wanted to add one thing to maybe address the gentleman's question in the back about, you know, I think everybody or most of us on the panel have used the word symbiotic at least once here. And what we're really getting to is like, you know, creative symbiotic activity or symbiosis. And I've seen it happen, and there's no one right way to do it, but it really just occurs through that natural cross-pollination. And I was just blown away that you've got local DJs that were willing to go out there and mix with the, you know, the hoi polloi or the rabble or the great unwashed in order to understand what was happening. Now that to me is tremendous, and that's almost like if you can't affect the policies around, you know, broadcasting at the federal level, maybe somebody can start to talking to somebody else, and we can get those in those values, you know, put forward so people know, hey, wow, there's something happening in my community. Because honestly, it's not just the music community, it's the other creative communities, and it's not just the creative communities, it's every community that is facing tremendous difficulty in these, you know, kind of sour economic times. So the siloed thinking and the compartmentalization just simply isn't going to work. My organization talks about creative local cultural communities, and that's kind of our, you know, long form way of saying a lot of what's being described right here on this panel. So the thing that we're concerned about at Future Music Coalition is, do these communities have the basic tools to accomplish that symbiosis? And one of those things is, do they have access to the local broadcasting? Low power FM, we fought for 10 years to get this really simple thing you know, to exist in American towns and cities, which is 100-watt micro radio stations that really actually do have, you know, tremendous value to local communities. The other side of that is, can we keep the internet out of the explicit control of 3 or 4 major corporations that want to enact a pay-for-play scheme? People call that net neutrality. We call that the internet. Can we keep the internet as a reasonably democratic tool? And given those tools, can we find ways to model what's successfully working in community A and, like, you know, transport some of that to community B, obviously with its own flavor and spin, using those infrastructural tools and those values that, you know, you guys were describing that I think is just so tremendous. If we do those things right, then and you know, document our successes, at maybe like at NCMR 2015, we'll be having a different conversation.
I just want to add to what everyone's saying. First of all, this is a really outstanding panel. I've personally interacted or talked or worked with most of these people on this panel, and it's really kind of a sort of affirmation of some of the work that I've done, and going back to, you know, 5-6 years ago, trying to deal with this issue of localism and looking at the structures that existed then and saying, well, there has to be a change. And now, 5 years later, you know, 2011, there is a change. And that's just what I want to point out, is that we're talking about a new media paradigm, both on the journalist level and on the artist level. And just one example I want to point out is there was a guy that, you know, had a lot of hype around him, this rapper guy. He was in a group, had a lot of hype around him. They had a local hit, got signed to a record label, then got dropped. Normally in that situation, that guy goes back and, I don't know, works in construction or just kind of fades away. You know, but what he did was he went and started making all these YouTube videos, releasing free songs on MySpace, over 600 of them. And just really created this his own phenomenon around him, and now he's like, you know, the hottest artist internationally. I'm talking about Little B, the Young Bass God, and you know, I just heard like this guy got signed to Live Nation. So basically, what we're talking about here is artists being able to actually change the paradigm, and the same should be true of media people, of journalists, of people in that ecosystem who are creating this synergy that we're talking about.
Awesome, thanks.
Hi, I'm Al Sachs, WMUA. One of the things that, and for those of you who don't know, we're in Western Mass. We're out in the sticks. Okay, this is not. We're not an urban area at all, but we do have a resource because the University of Massachusetts radio station is there. And the interesting thing is that it's a community and student radio station. So community members have been there for a long time and provide an ongoing basis. So one of the things I want to urge folks to do is this is a really interesting model, because obviously if you listen to student radio or college radio, which I do and I like, you get a lot of really fresh, interesting ideas coming in because students are coming in. But the other thing is that if you have community members who are in on the radio station and get there on regular shows, they have that community tie that can build that base, and then you get the symbiotic relationship between the students who are maybe coming from outside into the area and the people who've been there for a long time, and are able to kind of build that kind of cultural continuity. The other thing that I think that we need to just grasp is that we often get hung up on labels about what we can do and who we are and all this kind of stuff. I just, with 3 other people, basically put on a 18 band festival from 12 o'clock at night, from 12 in the morning to 12 at night. And we did this in about 6 weeks, local music, all local music. It was a tremendous success, and we were like, hey, this is great, we're gonna have a great party, da-da-da, we're gonna showcase local music. And when we went back to, talk to the guys we rented the gear from, they were like, well, you guys, you know what? You're producers now. And we're like, huh? Oh, yeah. All right. We're producers. Okay, what are we going to do next? So I think that a lot of times we get hung up on like, oh, I can't be on radio, or I can't do this. But there are places that you can grab access to and say, exactly like somebody else has, hey, screw that. Let's do our own thing here. Let's make it happen. Let's grab a church. Let's find a Union Hall. Let's find someplace and put on a show, because we're not going to get into the House of Blues. We're not going to get into the big venue. We got to make it happen ourselves, and that's where I think the real funky stuff happens.
Thanks. Does anybody else have a question?
Can I pass the mic off after a quick question? So really quick, in addition to LPFM, make sure that you check out Common Frequency, because there are 100 full-power FM radio channels left that have not yet been built out, and they need our support. There are 30 radio stations, new local radio stations, expiring this year, and 100 total in the next 3 years. But of course, the LPFM is a huge opportunity. My question is back to coming from a radio perspective. When you're in a smaller station, and in Seattle, an artist like Blue Scholars gets a lot of traction in the media, and then I don't know if it's them, the artists themselves, or their representation, cuts an exclusive deal with a station like KEXP. What do I say at that time I was with KBCS? What do you say as a smaller station to an artist or to their team to try to encourage them not to close off, like you said, the smaller or the more grassroots station?
Maybe it's not so much about like trying to get them to not make that deal, but trying to encourage them, thank them for what they've done for the smaller station, and try to keep that channel open, because it is a tight economy. People want the exposure that they want for bands. It's going to be like how much they can get, but getting it in their head that, look, we thank you so much. We were very happy to play a part in your initial success. Like, let's find ways to continue to work together.
That's some bullshit, That's the reason why we formed the Bay Area Hip Hop Coalition back in '88. It was precisely for that, because labels were coming in and picking and choosing and doing this exclusive stuff, and it really wound up being a bunch of people saying, all right, you can go there, and we will not boycott, but we'll start highlighting, and we'll make the party here, and we're not going to support anybody who doesn't support all of us. And I think one of the other challenges that we have is either we're going to create something, which we have the opportunity to do, that's going to reflect what we really need, or we're going to try and be industry light. We're going to try and be like the industry which is crumbling. We're going to try and be like the industry which we feel has exploited and not done just due by its artists and practitioners and workers within it. Or we're going to, and to me, that's a holdover for that. That's the type of stuff that Clear Channel does. When local radio station popped up, they were calling people, if you go on that station or do a drop, we will cut you off. And my question to the artists was, is that radio station not playing anything that's your competition? They're telling you don't go to the competition, but are they not playing any other artists, on that same station? And of course they were playing other musicians. So I said, they're not being exclusive to you. They're not playing you 24/7. And then the thing is, I don't want to support you if you do that. If you know, I wouldn't play at Blue Scholars, and those are my friends if they were to come to town and do that sort of exclusivity, because it undermines the community at large. And I just don't think there's any excuse for it. I don't have a tolerance for it. I would be outside encouraging people to not support that sort of practice and behavior. It's why the music industry has been fucked up for such a very long time. People with power trying to flex it on everybody else. These people didn't make songs by themselves in a vacuum. Their songs are reflective of a larger community. If you're talking about stress and strife, I go through stress and strife. So you're reflecting you're reflecting part of my experience, part of our experience. How dare you just cut that off from everybody? It's bad enough that we have intellectual property battles now. You play this record, you sample that, you do all these different types of things that we would naturally do. We have people picking and choosing in this music industry. You sampled that, you sampled this, you did that, you got to pay a license for this. All that stuff is already problematic. But to have artists that actively do that, to me, is just inexcusable. And so I'm pissed at that. You know, I mean, I get so mad when I hear that artists do that, because they also do it with publications. How many artists come to town and then they go, we will only talk to this magazine and not the rest? The solution to it is that you start covering everybody else and you blow them up. But at the same time, it's just on principle you shouldn't be doing it.
My name is Mary Nichols. Fusebox Radio Broadcast, BlackRadiosBack.com. I think one of the main things that everybody keeps touching base on is there just seems to be a big lack of respect on the levels of what actually makes an artist blow up. I came up from the college arena. Now, you know, we got the syndicated show and the net and stuff like that. Like, there was no choice but for you to go to a college station back in the day and get your foundation or community station back in the day. And even now, you have artists who will talk about, you know, fuck radio, but they have PR people that reach out to my kind of outlet. And your kind of outlet was like, okay, then why the fuck did you reach out to my outlet, part of my language, and everything? And now we have something where, besides the fact that that's your foundation, you can also make real business moves and money with it, whether it's getting airplay and getting stuff via sound exchange and media base and all of that type of good stuff. I think my main issue is how can we actually reflect back to the artist that we're all important. That one BET spin, while it's nice, you know, it could be at 5 in the morning, it's not going to do you any good in the long run if you're not maintaining a basic foundation. And with some of these artists, they'll get that high, but they come right back down when all that mainstream stuff, you know, goes back down. Like, how can we, like, just get it back to just having that overall respect for not just the local music scene in terms of we support artists, but the artists supporting the media people themselves?
Yeah, I'll just make this real quick because I deal with this with, you know, I can't tell you how many times I have a publicist beat my door down to get 200 words in the source and then not call me back when I want to do a full-page feature in the Phoenix, which is, first of all, the source didn't even have a website for fucking years. And it's like, it blows me away. I mean, my blog gets more views than, you know, than that damn source thing's going to get. So it's like, you know, and my answer to you is I tell the publicist, you're fucking crazy. And I tell them, and they know that, and like, it's unbelievable. I mean, when I stopped writing for a lot of the nationals, like some of them, I can't tell you, I mean, YRB, no diss to them. It's a good magazine. It looks good. Who the hell reads it? You know what I'm saying? And so that I just tell them straight up, you're misguided. Do you hit up any of the other alt-weeklies? Go ahead.
Coming from similar worlds, I think, you know, the musicians are always going to want the most eyeballs as possible and ears as possible. The managers are always going to want the same thing. That's just what they're after. The publicists don't know, and this is probably because the world of the publicist is changing due to the technology just as dramatically as any of the other industries in and around music. And traditionally, it was about the connections that you had at these, you know, pillar publications, these papers of record, these big radio stations, and you just worked the levers. And you know that doesn't really work in this world. When you say, I mean, my blog gets as many hits as, like, you know, another thing too. You know, so I understand, but you can't blame. I would love to just say, try not to blame the artist and the people who are trying to work for the artist here, because their goals are basically just exposure. Their goals are trying to get to that next level. I hate the fact that we're still living in a universe where the MTV Cribs and the rock star mentality exists, because it's bullshit, and it really makes it difficult for people to deal with each other on an eye-to-eye level. You know, that mythology needs to go away. I think it's on its last legs, but at the same time, you know, I think if you have an opportunity to talk to an artist directly or a manager directly, you're going to hear a little bit differently from them than you would a publicist. And I encourage anybody who wants to hear the perspective of an artist to talk directly to the artist whenever possible. They're not a monolithic group, but you're going to get way more information about what their actual needs are than you would from any of the intermediaries.
We do mixers once a month as well, and they're so important. You have no idea what it's like to go to a mixer or a networking event where no expectations and no agenda. And I don't think that the respect between any of us, whatever you're doing, whatever hat you're wearing, is going to take place unless you sit down and have a meaningful interaction with that person. Because I get in fights all the time with these guys. I'm pointing them out because they're here with us. But like, I've had a conversation with Pop Pistol and Ernesto and be like, you need to care about net neutrality. And they're like, why should I care about net neutrality? You know, I got a show. You know, it's really me taking the time explaining to them why internet policies, why media communication policies are important to me, but also it's me taking the time to getting to know them as a band and what's important to them. Or Melanie, who comes from a policy background, like respect and relevancy is so important. And I'm glad you pointed that out. But unless you can establish respect and make your work relevant to the next person, I mean, not much is going to get done.
All right. Thank you all for coming. Round of applause for awesome panelists.